Welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast with Stuart Fensterheim, LCSW, your source for the latest tips and practical down-to-earth advice on creating emotionally connected, thriving relationships. Now, here's Stuart.
Hi there, and this is Stuart Fensterheim, the Couples Expert. Welcome to my Couples Expert Podcast. This is a great day here in Arizona. It's about 85 degrees and it is sunny, and we're here just really enjoying each other's company here at the Couples Expert. And one of the things that I was thinking about today having to do with this podcast, and we're going to be talking today with Cait Wotherspoon from Australia, and we're going to be talking about grief and loss. One of the things about this week in particular, with Monday being 9/11, and it being such a somber holiday, what I've done is I did a couple of articles, and I also did a video on 9/11 and the impact of that holiday and what it's had related to the kids that we love, the family relationships, and particularly in light of the people who have people that they knew that passed away in 2001. And I was thinking a lot about my brother this week because my brother David is an attorney out of Washington, D.C. And one of the things that I recall right about that same time is he shared with us that he was actually at a meeting on the top of the World Trade Center about a day or two before the attack. And it just brings to home how fortunate we are sometimes to have the people in our life with us, and that we need to really make sure that we tell everyone every day how important they are to us. And what I teach here at the Couples Expert with the couples that come here with my YouTube videos is really about authenticity and vulnerability. And I just finished up with a couple who we talked for most of the session about the fact that the interpretations that we make of one another really get in the way quite often with feeling close and connected. And that if we truly believed that our partners cared about us and that we didn't have misinformation, information that we take in and we interpret and then turn it around in our heads, and what we do is we then define them as not caring and not loving, we would do far better because we would take risks of vulnerability with them that would allow us to tell people how important they are to us. And I think the 9/11 holiday and our topic today of grief and loss, and talking with Cait, who is an expert on that topic, we're going to be talking about how different people grieve so differently. And at least for me, one of the messages is don't wait another day to tell those people in your life how much they matter. So what we're going to do today is talk about grief and loss from a few perspectives. One of the things that Cait talks a great deal about is the death of a child and the impact that that has on the couple and their relationship and how to maintain a closeness in spite of that horrible, horrible grief that people have. But I'd also like to talk about, because one of the things that has been going on for me and a lot of the couples in my practice is we're having parents getting older and that we're anticipating in the not too distant future their passing. And how will that impact the couple, the relationship, when one person is grieving and the other person is trying to be a support, and what happens that may pull people apart or keep them close. So Cait's going to help us greatly about that. What I want to do is tell you a little bit about her, though. Cait is a therapist who I met on a Facebook group, and she and I have interacted on a couple of occasions. And one of the things that I will tell you right off is Cait is warm, and she's that kind of therapist that you know that you can relate to. And not every therapist is like that. Her story is somewhat fascinating because what she informed me is that growing up, she wanted to be a teacher, a psychologist possibly, a nurse, but more importantly, a prima ballerina. And I actually can relate to that because some of you may not be aware, but this couple expert at one point went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City trying to be an actor. So she and I have that creative bug. She was quite a bit more successful, though, because what the story is that at around 14 years old, she actually became a ballet teacher, and she began choreographing dances. And her dream was to dance with Rudolf Nureyev. But what happened for her is that she met her husband and everything sort of turned around. We'll go forward a number of years. When she was 27, not only did her life take a different direction, but it really turned into a cyclone when she found herself with a 2.5-year-old daughter and was pregnant with some twins. And one of the twins did not do very well and passed away. So she spent a lot of time the first years in the hospital, and she had firsthand experience with a lot of grief and loss. Her dad also was diagnosed with lung cancer and died 18 months later after her twin passed away. So this is someone that not only has had a personal experience, but also a professional experience with grief and loss. So I think she's someone that we want to pay very close attention to. She really has devoted most of her lifetime in helping couples, both adults, kids, and couples, deal with grief. So, Cait, welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast. I am really excited that you've agreed to give of yourself and your time and really help my audience understand this incredibly interesting topic.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Stuart. I am so excited about doing this. I love what you do. And, I've seen your podcasts and your videos. It's just, you're amazing. And I think you're passionate about it as I am.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the acknowledgement. But I wanted to start out with a question. As I said in the introduction, part of I know why you went into this as your own life experiences, but I remember you saying in sort of the brief bio you sent me that even early on you wanted to possibly be a psychologist. Tell me and my listeners a little bit about what led you to the field, a little bit about your own life, and how it all fit together for you.
Gosh. I'm the eldest of 5 children, so I have a lot of psychology already around that, knowing the eldest child, the second, third, fourth, fifth, and how we fit into one another. I think that's where my interest in psychology sort of started, because I had to work out different things about my brothers and sisters. But I can remember when I was 7, I decided that I was going to be, all those things that you said in the intro, the prima ballerina, a teacher, a nurse, and a psychologist. And, I even remember where I was when I made that decision. But I've actually done all that. I left school, became a registered nurse. I don't know what you call them over there, where we used to be certified and now we're registered.
So you made the decision to go into psychology to help you understand some of the family dynamics, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I think that's where the start of it was. And then I became a registered nurse and I worked in oncology and palliative care and saw, how death and dying impacted the family in totally different ways. So then, this made me, just think about it. And I did do a certificate in oncology and palliative care as well. And in that I had a counselling module. And then during nursing, I was teaching as well, and I was teaching the psychology of a patient, which people didn't do back then. It was like doing things to a patient, not how, the patient reacted to you touching them or their family being in the room when you're doing things. So then I decided to do teaching from that. And in teaching, it seems a weird jump, but in teaching I saw the total family dynamic, and these families were considered healthy, but the dynamic, of the parents wanting their child to be the best in the class, the best in the school, the best they can be. So, and I saw the children and how they responded and reacted to their parents. So this got me thinking more about psychology. And now I became a psychotherapist first. And my background is in transactional analysis, and that's very relational.
Yeah, explain to the audience, my listeners, a bit about what transactional analysis is, because I think it's not something we hear a lot about anymore here.
No, that's right. I think we all know Sigmund Freud's, id, ego, and superego. Eric Berne is our founder, and he also had 3 ego states. They're the parent, the adult, and the child. And it works so wonderfully for me as a therapist. I don't have to guess what their ego states are. I can just sit and observe. And their ego states are communicated by words, body language, and facial expressions, even the tone of how they're talking to each other. I just sit and observe them and then feed back on, what state they're in. So a couple might come in to me and one of the couple may be in their parent state and the other of the couple may be in their child state. And I just observe these things, how they're interacting with one another. We call them transactions, but it's this interaction that they have, and they have small patterns like a facial expression, and they assume things of each other. So I do the psychoeducation for them and just observe and say, I notice that you're actually in your parent state. You're actually saying, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And she's actually in her child state going, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So then we get to talk about, I've obviously given them, the parent, the adult and the child before we start into the session and given them that education of what it is. So then they start to realise and they actually catch each other and go, hang on, you're in your parent state, I need you to be in your adult state. So we can talk on a level ground.
So with this and this knowledge, and then you're beginning to work in the grief work, talk about how that all sort of came about, and particularly I know, with the loss of your child and how that all sort of transitioned, and what is some of the things you've learned about that in working with people with grief and loss?
In my experience was almost 32 years ago now with the loss of our daughter. So in that, I gave birth to twins by a C-section. That was traumatic in itself. Then I was put in a maternity ward with other crying babies. And my babies were in the NIC unit, neonatal intensive care unit. So I suffered such sadness and grief within that. And also, my husband grieved differently to what I did. And also, he hated hospitals. So I spent 2 months in hospital with him visiting every now and then, and our daughter visiting. We still had the 2.5-year-old daughter who my dad looked after. And so this whole dynamic set up of disconnection between us. My daughter and I became the family unit, and I actually unconsciously chose for my husband to be a separate unit. So I only allowed him in when I deemed it okay for him to be in, because he didn't do emotions very well, and I'm all about emotion. So I realised then that couples, and everybody grieves differently, but couples don't necessarily share their grief, try to understand each other's grief and support each other through their grief, and then they connect after this sharing, and it's just such a beautiful building of a relationship then. I see so many couples, once they understand that, because they say to me, oh, he's not grieving. He comes in and, he's happy, he's gone to work and he's not grieving. I never see him cry. And then we find out that how he grieves is he sits in his truck and he cries and cries, and, there's no outlet for him. So then they learn about each other's grief and get to talk more about that grief.
I think those interpretations that you're talking about are important to highlight because, my experience with couples, whether it's with grief or in other ways, as someone that works under a model that's attachment-based, that how we view our partners and how we see them and the interpretations we make affect so much how we relate and how we feel loved or unloved by them. So that if you have a grieving family where there's a loss of a child, and I can't even imagine that grief, I had my own experiences with my own daughter who was quite sickly early on, and just going to the hospital alone, because I recall this like it was yesterday, and it was 20 years ago. Every Wednesday, we'd go into the neonatal intensive care unit to visit her, and there was always something. The one that I remember the most is that they were having some problems with her IV, and I walked in on a Wednesday morning. It was around 7:30, and they had taken her IV and put it in her head. And actually, I later learned that that's like almost the best place for it. But the visual was just overwhelming for me, and there's something that always going to go wrong, so, and that's just hospitalized. Imagining that same emotion, and now we have a loss, we have a death, and men especially who don't do emotion typically very well in terms of sharing it. So he's sitting in his car with the story that you just told about your husband, crying. And my hunch is, what a lot of people would say, I think, well, as a man, he's not going to let that out. But what I can venture to guess is part of why he didn't let it out was this incredible love for you and not wanting to make it harder for you, which is a total wrong move on his part, because you felt alone, and he's doing it because he doesn't want you to feel alone.
Exactly.
It's pretty amazing.
It is. And I see couples, there is one really strong couple being strong, and I say, why do you want to be strong? I want to be strong for him or her, because it's not always the male partner that is being strong. So, and what is strong? If you're keeping your emotions away from your partner, how does she get to feel loved?
But here's the question that comes up a lot for me in terms of that. Part of my teaching as a couples counselor is about vulnerability and authenticity.
That's right.
If my authentic self is saying, I don't know if I can handle what's happening here. My wife just lost the baby. She's the one in more pain than I am because she's the one that was carrying the child. How do I show her that I feel somewhat out of control emotionally without her feeling more worried? And so it's that misinterpretation that crying and grieving together is actually the connection and not the separation. And people don't know that.
Yes, that's exactly right. And there's, there's intuitive grief as well. I generally get couples come into me. One's an intuitive griever, the other's an instrumental griever.
What does those mean? What do those mean? Would you define those, please?
Right. Intuitive grief is like the emotional person. They like to express their grief, and the grief comes in waves, so they're okay with crying, they're okay with screaming. They feel more than they think, and they're focused on exploring and expressing their feelings and processing their emotions. So they're very external people. Mm-hmm. So the instrumental grief is more like it's physical, it's experienced in a physical way, and it's cognitive, like they think more than feel.
So it's the intellectualization part of the emotion.
Exactly, yeah. And these type of grievers generally start, charities or some sort of drive, for that reason.
So sort of the mom that started SAD, Students Against Drunk Driving, out here, it's sort of like she channeled all of her energy about the loss of her child into creating this legislative body that made the change in the laws.
Exactly, yes. And they're usually the instrumental griever. They get things done, they do, rather than be. Mm-hmm. So that's where the disconnect, I find, in couples is.
You mean one being one way and the other being the other way, and not understanding that the instrumental griever, it's just a different kind of grief, but it's still grief.
Exactly, yeah. That's actually my job, to help them understand that they are both grieving, but they're both grieving in different ways, and totally different ways. Sometimes it's really hard to understand the other. So there's a lot of empathy work that goes into that as well. Two-chair work we do with one another as well.
So if you have this grief happening in the midst, and sometimes it's tragically and unforeseen, obviously, sometimes it's something like a child's been ill for a very, very long time. How does it affect, if you have a couple that's already disconnected prior to that, how does that sort of affect the family? And what do you as a therapist do to try to get them, because we know statistics say a high percentage of couples who have a loss end up divorced.
That's right.
So, which is such a tragic thing, because we now know how to help couples from that feeling of disconnect to a feeling of connection. How do you, as a grief and loss counselor, work with couples like that?
It is really difficult work, because I have couples come in and they are just angry or shut down. And there's a whole lot of work around anger and working through anger. And this is, and I also work with attachment theories too. Like, that's part of transactional analysis, is attachment theories. Mm-hmm. So working with that, looking at their patterns and how they've come through their relationship together. Generally, their relationship was broken before, and it generally takes about 5 years for couples to get to therapy to try to fix their relationship. So there's that part of it. And then their child dies, And we've had a lot of car accidents with, teenagers just getting their licence. They're 17 years old, go out onto our back roads, and our back roads are dirt, and, we lose a lot of children in that way. So bringing a couple in, working with the grief and working with their relationship are two separate things. So I work on their relationship first, acknowledging the grief within that relationship. So it's working through the anger, working through the shutdown, and what that feels for each other.
What is your philosophy? Because I have a strong bent on most things are better served working with the couple together. When you're dealing with grief and loss issues, do you feel like the better plan for a family is for the two people to get individual counseling, or should they stay and work through their individual issues about the grief and loss as a couple?
I thoroughly believe that they need to work as a couple. I don't like seeing people separately because if they're in grief and they're disconnected from each other, the idea of coming to therapy is to reconnect. So if they're having therapy separately, that's sort of strengthening that disconnect. So I'd rather have them in the room, see what they're like.
Yay! I love it. That is exactly what I do. I'm actually, as a couples therapist, refuse to see people individually, because if you're coming in here, you may be able to talk to me, but that doesn't change anything about the two of you, which is why you're here. And if that feeling of being alone is actually worse, particularly because what I find is trust issues with grief and loss just go rampant.
Exactly.
And if I'm sitting down with one partner and the other person's not there, the trust is even worse, particularly in light of so many couples during these type of painful experiences have, said things like, I think we should get divorced. So if I'm now sitting with one person, the partner's going, uh-oh, are they talking about leaving me?
Exactly.
So I love that you do it that way, and it fits so well with the attachment framework. Now, one of the things you and I were talking about, and I want to sort of shift gears a bit, because we've been talking mostly about the death of a child. What we were talking about earlier, and we were sort of joking a little bit about, was this whole concept of also talking about a lot of the people that I see who are in their, mid 40s to, early or late 60s are dealing with parents who are getting older and are, I'm a very fortunate man in that I have four in-laws, well, two in-laws and two of my own parents who basically are still both alive and very active. And what my wife and I were talking about the other day is that not too long in a distant future, we're going to be sitting down and having to grieve over a lot of people who are important to us because of just a natural course of life. How does grief and loss differ for a couple when it was a child or when it was one or the other's parent?
This is actually very close to my heart, Stuart, because my mum, who was 86, died Christmas Day last year. She had dementia, suffered, 7 years with dementia, and she lived with us for the first of the 7 years, and that was really difficult for us. And so I think that in itself is different as well, having a parent die from dementia, the complications of dementia, because they've been dying for a long time. And there's also a difference between, and they're not the person that you loved, that you knew. So it's a long grief, but still it's a shock in the end, even though you're expecting it. And again, my husband, totally different to what I am, but we're more connected now. And we could sit with one another, and his grief coping strategy is joking about things, and I'm okay with that. I understand why he does it, because he's really uncomfortable with emotions. And he used to have this joke. He'd call my mother the dragon lady. And he'd just have this joke, oh, well, no more dragon lady now, And I was really, really upset. And he'd just come and hug me and hold me. And I understood that he needed to make that silly joke, but he knew what my need was. My need was just to be held.
What do you think helped the two of you get to a place where you had that understanding? I mean, that's a key to this, that you were able to rise above the trigger, which would be the laughter, and be able to say, this isn't his minimizing your experience.
Do you know what, Stuart? Years ago, when our surviving twin got to 14 years old, she did all the teenager things, and we had her in therapy. Her therapist said to us, I think you two need to go to therapy. So we actually went to therapy then. She was the target patient, right. But we were actually the ones in trouble. So we did our own therapy. And so now I do couples therapy because I know how amazing that was, to be able to be vulnerable with another human being is huge when, you've got trauma, all the baggage of your childhood and, what you expect people to say and do. Couples assume each other, assume what each other are feeling. Right. And, being in therapy, you don't get to assume. You get to say, I'm feeling really vulnerable now and I really want to help you, but I don't know how.
Right. And it sounds like he was able to tell you that his laughter or whatever his technique is to coping with it didn't mean he wasn't in pain, and you could hear that message.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And we get to talk about that all the time. And with my couples, that's what I try to do, because you do things to hurt one another. When you're grieving, you try to hurt the other person. And in a way, that's like a test. Do you really love me enough to stay? Or are you hurting me? I'm hurting you because I'm hurting really badly. So,
I hear couples talking who have lost a child about them not being sure they can even stay on this earth and talking suicide at times.
Yes.
If there's a listener out there that has a friend or someone who is going through some of that and they begin to hear some of that kind of talk, aside from the obvious, which is, if you have someone talking about hurting themselves, you're going to get them help. Do you have any suggestions for people of how to help someone with that? Is it just being present and being with them and sort of empathetic in that way? Or are there things that you would recommend people do to help this person?
Well, I've actually been in this situation myself, having, our daughter die. And then, there's lots of things that happened after that as well with her health and everything. And I often thought of suicide and how could I kill myself. I just wanted things to stop, and be normal. So if you have a friend and the friend sits with you and asks you the question, we have a day in Australia called Are You OK Day.
Could you repeat that? Because I wasn't sure what that was. I want to make sure people heard it.
Okay. In Australia, we have a day called Are You OK?
Are you? I just got it. R like Robert, U like umbrella, K,
Exactly.
but it's are you okay?
Hey,
That's
right.
a real holiday?
It is, yeah.
It's like on a calendar somewhere?
Yeah, sure.
Really? You know,
Yeah.
I'm learning talking about the internet, I'm learning all of these really interesting. Australia just has some really incredibly type of holidays, I have to say. They just do things right. I love it. I love it.
Oh, dear.
Tell us about Are You Okay Day?
Oh, this is just about, if you've noticed a friend, it's putting front and center mental health. And if you have a friend who has changed the way they are, like they're not getting out of bed or they're not looking the way they usually do, or, they're not even talking the way they used to, or they're shut down, you're given permission on this day to say, are you okay? And go out, have a cup of coffee with this friend and, say, look, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. What are you going through? I've noticed something different about you. You usually dress this way and you're dressing a different way. You're usually talkative and you're not. What's happening for you? So just sitting and being present in that moment, having someone actually see who you are can be both terrifying and acknowledging. So it's a big risk to take, but I really recommend people take it and just say, are you okay? Be present and don't give answers. Don't try to fix, just listen and find out whether they've actually planned to kill themselves as well, because then they really need professional help. Mm-hmm. But if it's a way of, I just want the world to stop. That's what I used to say all the time. I just want the world to stop. I want everything to be okay. And it's not. So, and just having these, maybe make a coffee date every couple of days and catch up. Mm-hmm. Telling stories is amazing. It's amazingly helpful and it's good medicine, I feel.
I think one of the hard parts about loss, particularly maybe a child or a parent, is particularly if it's like a young child involved, the pain that I hear from a lot of teenagers is when their memory of their parent is like they don't have a visual image. And it's like, were they not important? No, you were 2 when they died or 3 when they died. And now as a teenager, you don't have it. Of course you don't. However, if we keep people alive in our thoughts and in our memories, it really is really fulfilling. And I don't think anyone needs to feel bad or say, what's wrong with me, if you're talking to someone who died, still having conversations. It doesn't mean you're psychotic. It means that you love them and you miss them. And I think we all, probably the movie that I like to think about when it comes to death and dying is one of my most favorite movies out there is the movie Ghost. Oh, and yes. And I remember the final scene, which is such a wonderful, wonderful scene, where Patrick Swayze, I think it was about to go, I think to heaven is where, whatever your religious beliefs are. He was going to a better place. And he turned to the actress and he said, do you know what? What I realize now, I'm about to, go to my resting place, I'm filled with love. And that thing, that spirit, whether it's spiritual, whether it's metaphysical, whatever you want to believe, but I think the memory of a child and a parent takes many different shapes and forms, and not being physically present doesn't mean that you don't still have that connection.
No, that's right, Stuart. I want to share a story with you about my grandma. When I was 17, she died suddenly. She had a massive heart attack and we were so close. She talked to me about everything. And we used to write letters to one another, physical letters before email. And I still have those letters. I have the ones from her to me and from me to her. She kept them. And my mother gave them to me after she died. So that I often read back over them and remember her voice. I remember her sitting there in front of me. I was 17 at the time. And, you know, it just brings that person back into your life. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, I want to just really thank you for coming on and your vulnerability and how giving you are. And one of the things that you've been gracious enough to do is offer something free to my audience. And I want them to know that on the show notes for this week, there would be a link to receive a PDF, and I believe it's Coping with the Death of a Child, is it not?
Yes, it is. So I've got this lovely PDF, and it's called Grieving the Death of Our Child, How to Stick Together, Understand and Support Each Other. So it just outlines some of the feelings that you might be having, and these can become discussion points for the couple. And then I give them a few activities that they can do together. So it's all about reconnection.
That's great. And the other thing is I want people to know that if they want to reach out to you, how they could do that. Could you give your website, and if there's an email that if someone wants to connect with you, how they could do that?
Sure. Thanks, Stuart. It's indigotherapies.com.au, and then my email is cait@indigotherapies.com.au.
And thank you again, Cait, for coming on, for sharing, giving of yourself, your time. And I really just feel so wonderful, and I know that the people listening to this is going to really benefit from your expertise and suggestions. And I wish you all a good night, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode with your host, Stuart Fensterheim. You're one step closer to reigniting that fiery passion with your partner. For more information
and your 30-minute free phone consultation with Stuart,
visit www.thecouplesexpertscottsdale.com. We'll see you next time.